Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And last year I began with the iron law of economic history as laid down by Niall Ferguson, the great Harvard economic historian, and as relayed through the history of the Medicis, the Ottomans, through so many different empires from the Spanish and others. And that was the simple point. Those societies, those states, those nations that live beyond their economic means will ultimately suffer an enormous coming of reckoning. To put it another way, to paraphrase Mr. Micawber from Charles Dickens, if you spend more than you have, the answer is simple: unhappiness. In the end, the idea that we can perpetually spend more than we have, more than we earn, leads to a fundamental problem. The generation that expends is engaged in intergenerational theft, and their children and their children's children will pick up the bill, and they will pick it up in the form of lower living standards, greater pressure, fewer funds to achieve the things which are important. So in other words, as each family knows, as each business knows, if we do not budget prudently now, the reckoning that shall come in the future will not necessarily be borne by us, but by those that come after us. And that, I would think, is a matter of deep regret for each member of this House. And so where there have had to have been difficult choices in recent budgets, that's because there were bad choices in previous budgets. It's a very important thing to understand. Having lived through the home insulation program, foreseen, forewarned and sadly having to pick up the pieces, I can recognise that there are profound social consequences for bad policy. Right now, we are going through the process of compensating the businesses that suffered from that home insulation program. I personally talked with and met with and finalised compensation for many of the families. Indeed, we dealt with all of the families of the 4 young men who are involved with the home insulation program. The grand point here being bad choices lead inevitably to hard choices, and that is the great historic situation in which we find ourselves. Now, fortunately, we have made hard choices, and that means that we are able to better manage our circumstances. We can see the decline in the budget deficit from $36 billion to $26 billion to $14 billion to $7 billion over the out years, and then heading towards a long-term sustainable position. This comes against a budget that we inherited, which over its previous 6 years had gone from a surplus of $20 billion to deficits of $27 billion, $54 billion, $47 billion, to down, as we see from there, to $43 billion, to $18 billion and to $48 billion by my recollection. What does that mean? It means that we went from a position of profound national economic security to profound expenditure. Now, of course, there are external events, but what was extraordinary was the degree of inbuilt, ever-growing expenditure beyond the capacity of the budget to meet it, which had been left as a legacy when the Rudd and Gillard governments were voted out. And so that inbuilt expenditure was enormous. So to the extent that we are going through the process of bringing Australia back to a sustainable economic position, it's also important to understand that we have had $90 billion of write-downs over the 4 years of the current forward estimates in revenue. That means, had we not made the changes we did, not only would we have not been able to have made the reductions, but we would have been an additional $90 billion worse off than the budget papers indicate now. So it's the comparison with the counterfactual, not just the absolute, which is critical here. We have closed that $90 billion and we are making real reductions in the annual deficit. So that is an extremely important intergenerational legacy, a fundamental intergenerational legacy, because when you look around the world, whether it is Greece or Ireland or Iceland, whether it is Italy or Spain, whether it's the examples from Asia or Latin America, in the end, time catches up with everybody who spends more than they have. In the case of families and businesses, it's earlier. In the case of nations and budgets, it's later. But the iron law of economic history, as outlined by Niall Ferguson and so many others, is inevitable. If you indulge beyond your means, and no matter how worthy the seeming cause, in the end you will have disrupted that cause. You will have left a legacy which is unsustainable and unattainable in terms of allowing future generations to experience the same outcomes. And so where there have had to have been hard decisions, I repeat, it's because previously there were bad decisions. Having said that, I think we have achieved an extraordinary outcome in this budget. And I want to address it briefly from the perspective of my own electorate of Flinders. With regards to the Roads to Recovery program, something in a semi-rural electorate of extreme importance. Across the councils that I represent, we've seen a double payment, more than $8.1 million across the electorate. For Bass Coast Shire, $1.33 million. For Cardinia Shire, $2.34 million. For Casey City, $2.12 million. For Mornington Peninsula Shire, $2.29 million, and for French Island, which is unincorporated, $38,000, which will assist, I hope, in grading and maintaining the central spine on that road. Through the $1 billion National Stronger Regions Fund, which of course deals with national infrastructure projects in regional areas, I am absolutely delighted that the Casey Cultural Precinct, or Bunjil Place, just outside of my electorate, admittedly, received $10 million in the budget. It is in fact an area that effectively encompasses both the seats of Holt and Latrobe, and it's a tremendous outcome for the City of Casey. The Commonwealth money should leverage state money, and I call on the state to match or exceed the Commonwealth's funding, as well as to support the great work of the City of Casey. This cultural precinct, I hope, and it's something I will work towards, will be a brilliant architectural outcome, a magnificent community asset, and I would like to see, whether it's the National Gallery of Australia or the National Museum of Australia, whether it's the National Gallery of Victoria or the Museum of Victoria, place some of their holdings in the Casey Cultural Centre as a Victorian regional precinct, because of course each of these institutions holds far more in their stocks than they are able to display for the public. And so that additional holding should be available, and I would like to work with each of those four institutions to find one that will establish a regional outpost, or really a regional centre, in this magnificent new Bunjil Place. And that, for Casey, one of the fastest growing precincts in Australia, would be a wonderful vote of confidence and a real destination maker. In addition, the Stronger Communities program announced in the budget will provide $150,000 a year over 2 years to fund small capital projects in local communities. I will be establishing a local community advisory panel which will operate in exactly the same way as the panel for the Anzac Centenary grants, which had a tremendous role in advising on critical projects. And so soon enough we will be calling for panel members, and soon after that we will be calling for projects. So against that background, at the end of the day, the heart and soul of this budget was about jobs, both for families and as created by small businesses. Elsewhere the small business package has been covered, but for the thousands and thousands of small businesses in the electorate of Flinders, the instant asset write-off is something which they have talked to me about each and every day that I have been in the electorate since the budget. The tax deductions for small businesses are of tremendous merit, and also the recognition of sole traders and unincorporated entities. These have received a great deal of positive approval. At the end of the day, this budget is about giving people the chance to be their best selves by giving them the chance to employ and by giving them the chance to be employed. For that, I commend the budget and I commend the general direction of giving the future generations the best chance to live the life of their choice.